The 2018 Global Peace Index was released last week, showing the extensive economic cost of violence around the world, namely South Africa and across the global regions, and showing that the world is losing trillions of dollars on the back of economic violence, or violence that are related, bringing the cost of that. South Africa is one of those countries in Africa with the highest figure. You can check that out. But let's get this conversation around Nigeria's insecurity and how that is feeding into the country's economy, food supply, among other things. Bismarck Rawani, economist and CEO at a financial derivatives company. Thank you very much for standing by. And of course, Paul Alaje, senior economist at SPM Professionals from our Abuja studios. Mr. Rawani, let's get started with you on the issue of insecurity. And this is it. Mr. Rawani?
Well, yeah, I can hear you.
Yes. I just want to put this in context very quickly. Yes, Mr. President says in 2002, 2003, he traveled by road, 34 out of 36 states campaigning for election. In 2019, he traveled by air to all the 36 states. That is understandable, as Paul said earlier, because he's Mr. President and his security is very important. But he's leaving office in another 4 years from now, so he will not have the luxury of the presidential jets around him anymore. So he will have to travel by road in a number of cases. So how important is the new phase and face of insecurity in the country is going to hit everyone moving forward?
I think it's important to know because Mr. President in 2014 was attacked in Kaduna. We're lucky that the vandals did not succeed. If not, we would not have had him as president today. So it is important that he traveled by road all through, but some of the states don't have airports, so he had to go by road to those places. But I think what I wanted to say earlier was that the Gini coefficient, which measures the level of income inequality in a country, the higher that figure, the more violent and vicious the crime rate is. South Africa has a Gini coefficient of about 52. We have a Gini coefficient of 43. Basically, it means the best thing is to have a Gini coefficient of 1, which means that everybody has an equal income, which is not possible. However, the higher it is, the more vicious the crime is. We were at 40 before, we've gone up to 43, and it's turning towards 48. If this continues, you're going to have more kidnap and ransom, more crime and all, and there will be income inequality, opportunity inequality, and financial inequality. And that's why you're seeing it in South Africa. The crime rate is vicious there, and it's also accompanied by unemployment. So you look at unemployment, look at income inequality, and look at opportunity inequality. But I want to step back a little bit and correct one misconception. Mr. President said he will lift 100 million people out of poverty. The fact that, and my other colleague in Abuja is saying that it means he will create 80,000 jobs. The fact that you're employed doesn't mean that you're not in poverty. You can be employed in a less than living wage. So employment is a necessary condition to fight poverty, but it's not sufficient to make it happen. So let us not confuse lifting out of poverty with employment, or even though employment is a major step and strategy to dealing with poverty. Secondly, we need to go back to structural issues. Like I said earlier on, we must deal with the structural and fundamental issues of the economy, which allows investments into it. My colleague talked about power. As long as you don't have cost-reflective tariffs, as long as you have that overhanging debt profile, as long as you have those structural imbalances, we will continue to produce 4,000 to 5,000 megawatts, which is nothing. So for us to do that, we need to alter the landscape so that investors will come in and invest significantly in generation, possibly transmission, and more than anything else, the distribution and the metering, the transformers and all that. It is a shame that Mr. President in 2014 in his initial broadcast said, we cannot accept 4,000 megawatts of power. It is not acceptable, it's a shame. But in 2019, we are still producing 4,000 megawatts. Nothing has changed because we are using the same strategy that was adopted in the past to fight a problem that has become probably hydra-headed. So we need some very dramatic solutions, both in power, in petroleum refining. Thank God Dangote is invested heavily in these refineries, and we have some modular refineries. We deal with that, and we price petroleum refined products at market, you will find that new investments will come in, even not new ones, but maintenance of the old ones. What the government will invest on significantly is on roads, rail, pipelines, storage depots, and all of this. Massive. We need to spend 5 to 10% of our GDP every year on infrastructure. We need to invest, not just spend. And to do that, you need about $20 to $30 billion a year. We have not done that. Our entire budget is only the budget is $5 or $8 billion. That's not enough. We need to invest more, and we need to encourage. The government is doing the right thing, but it's not enough. The impact is not being felt, and we need to do that. And that is what I mean by laying the foundation for 10 years' time. That foundation has to be strong.
Mr. Adewale, a quick one from you. Yeah. And I think perhaps this is not entirely new, but couched in different words. Mr. President says in that speech that the plan is to integrate rural economies to national economic grid. So he's talking about a new handshake between economic plans for cities with the rural areas. And he says this will be via credit access to small-scale farmers, rural micro-businesses, opening up the rural feed roads. Is this a new thing for you? If this is so, how do you think this administration should pursue this within the next 4 years?
No, what is happening now, you see, urbanization, 53% of Nigerians now live in urban areas. What has happened, some rural areas have become urban because of state creation, local government creation. So the urbanization process and integration of the formal and informal economy is taking place as of course. But, you know, my colleague in Abuja talked about import substitution. That's an old, archaic, anachronistic concept in economics. Import substitution, yes, in those days when you protected local industry. Now, industry has to be competitive. If not, what happens? You're going to have smuggling. So if we produce things that are competitively and we have competitively priced, and our cost structure is actually efficient, there's no way anybody can compete. You cannot import cement into Nigeria today to compete with Dangote and Lafarge. You cannot import beer into Nigeria today. Even if you import it, nobody will buy it because the price will be too high. So anywhere where we have actually extracted cost efficiency to be competitively advantageous, and as well as to drive comparative advantage, you will see that we'll make money and we'll be able to crowd out the imports. Not only that, we are going to take advantage of the regional integration, the African Free Trade Agreement, and our ECOWAS, our dominance in ECOWAS. You'll see that those are big markets, and Nigeria is going to thrive on those growth, on that kind of growth agenda. That's what the president was talking about in so many words, and I think they need to be encouraged. And I'm looking forward to a fiscal team that will be very aggressive, extremely aggressive, so that they'll be supported by the good words that are coming out of the central bank as to where monetary policy, to actually align monetary policy with fiscal policy to achieve that type of aggressive growth agenda. We must grow at 7 to 8% in the next 2 to 3 years, and that way the president would have laid the foundation for posterity and for the future generations.
Mr. Adewale, thank you. Paul, I want to have your views in Abuja Studios. Thank you very much, Paul, for being with us on the program. Paul, I want your views on this. Now, Mr. President is talking about rural-urban economic handshake here, inclusion. But again, if you look at news over the last couple of days and so, with insecurity, kidnapping, banditry, warming all the way down from the north central into the western part of the country and all that discourse, how do you think these play into each other here, Paul?
Yeah, thank you so much. Before answering your question, I need to quickly correct a number of things. When we talk about employment, we are talking about employment that guarantees income more than $2 a day. Unlike what Mr. Ruwani mentioned, we're not talking about those classifications he mentioned in economies that they actually call employment that does not guarantee real income, or when you can call it some kind of employment that you don't classify as those who gain job in order for them to have the kind of income that can take them out of poverty. Poverty itself is classified using income as those that live approximately less than $1.90 or, properly speaking, $2 a day. So when we say employment, it needs to get it clearly that I was referring to employment that is more than $2 a day. Even the minimum wage that is just being approved is not up to that. So those who might still think they are within the minimum wage, they might still be said to be poor. So for me, I just need to make that very clear that that is not what I meant. And he also referred to what he called the archaic strategy. And I'm not surprised that Nigeria lives in this kind of country today, because when you say that 30 million school uniforms, we should keep importing them in the name of playing to the gallery by telling people who are supposed to know better that we need to start manufacturing. Show me one country that focuses solely on oil or focuses solely on agriculture and say that converting some of the things, some of the revenue you spend abroad to yourself is a cake. I'm really shocked and surprised that somebody of this caliber would mention that. Now let's talk about security. From after the former president Yar'Adua, we saw reduction in kidnapping in South region. But if you take that forward, you see that when President Jonathan became the president of Nigeria, there was an increase in activity of Boko Haram, and it was widespread, and perhaps one of the reasons why President Buhari became president of Nigeria, because some Nigeria felt that President Jonathan might not be able to handle the issue of insecurity, and President Buhari, being a former military general, should have experience. And thankfully, when he came, we saw some level of reduction in Boko Haram attack. Abuja has been attacked a number of times. I shouldn't mention other states within the northern region. But what we have today is no longer much of Boko Haram. We have kidnapping. There are differences of South. We have it going around, even in Southwest. We have kidnapping, banditry, and all manner of criminality going around the country. Widespread criminality. Do we think that investment in a country called Nigeria will continue while you can see what, say, Global Peace Index reported last week to show that the more violence, the more insecurity, you will have less and less revenue, particularly investment in our country. This is what United Nations reported a couple of weeks ago. It was published by The Punch, by the way, that Nigeria lost 43% of foreign direct investment, 43% of foreign direct investment in 2019. Ghana gained 42% or so because Ghana now has new oil boom, and you have ENI, Italian here, ENI, driving such. Ghana, unlike Nigeria, with the largest population in Africa and West Africa, became the center of attraction for foreign direct investment.
Yeah, Paul, I just want us to manage time here very quickly. Thank you so much for your contributions. Now, what I'm looking at here in this a major part of the president's speech has to do with what the president says: we can lift 100 million people or millions of Nigerians out of poverty in 10 years. The president says we can lift 100 million people. Now we're trying to find the way out of that, and that particular part of the speech seems to have resonated across the media, social media, and what have you. So we're trying to find a solution to, one, inequality, as well as unemployment and poverty. I'm sure that's what Mr. Rawani was talking about here. How do we balance things out? And when we talk about the economics, you economists always disagree, because there are always two sides. Like someone says, you need two economists to advise you on what to do. One into your left here and the other to the right. That's what economists is all about. But again, we need to find a solution here, Paul and Mr. Rawani, on two of you, Mr. Rawani and Paul Alaja, to advise Mr. President. Two of you in the same room, sitting in front of Mr. President, and say, two of you, give me an advice on how to deal with import substitution, how to deal with sustainability in terms of domestic goods and services that we need to produce, and we stop forking out millions of dollars on imports that we can do here. How would two of you address this in front of Mr. President? Mr. Rawani, let's give it the first shot.
First and foremost, the thing is that the exchange rate is a price that brings consistency your external balances and your domestic economy. Once your exchange rate is adjusted, you'll find that certain imports become very expensive. You can see that when the exchange rate was adjusted, a lot of people that were going to the United States or Europe for medical treatment started going to India, and many of them started investing in Nigeria. That is diversification of the economy. When some things become too expensive because of the exchange rate mechanism, you'll find that demand for those domestic commodities increase. And I'd like to correct something that Paul said. The minimum wage of 18,000 naira is over $80 a month. And $80 is more than $2 a day, because $2 a day is $60 a month. So the minimum wage is actually in excess of that threshold of $2 a day. And again, like I said, employment is necessary, but it's not sufficient, and what we are sufficient to take out of poverty, because we have what they call a living wage. There are many Nigerians who are on wages that are not living wages. They are on subsistence, and we need to address all of that, and that's why I talk about structural changes. But my idea about import substitution is that when these things become too expensive, either to import or to, you will find that local production has increased. Look at what has happened to maize. Look at what has happened to what they call it, Chivita, Five Alive, and all these juices. You can see that Nigerians are producing all of these things now from local sources, not because of protection, not because of duties, not because of anything. It is because the exchange rate has moved in their favor. We are now producing almost 250,000 tons of cocoa. Ivory Coast and Ghana are coming together to say, look, let us now integrate backwards and make cocoa paste instead of doing this. There are many things that are being produced in this country today. Fertilizer, right? Petrochemicals, lubricants. All these things are being produced here because it is too expensive to actually import. And when Dangote's refinery and other refineries, we will not be importing fuel, we'll be actually exporting fuel. And many things that were Maggie Cube, were Guinness Stout and all being exported in this country. Why? Because it is now competitively advantageous for these manufacturers to put these products out in the market. Dangote is actually exporting cement to Niger, to Benin Republic, and other places. So it's not by what they call a command economy that you use in achieving a diversification of the economy. It is a matter of the tools of economic management, which includes the exchange rate, the interest rate, the import duties, and all the other incentives that make us competitive. And that is what the emphasis is. That is what modern economic theory talks about.
Mr. Lwane, thank you. Paul, you have about 1 minute, and I'm giving you the floor.
Let me quickly say this. If Nigeria followed that advice, Nigeria once followed that advice, and we had a 10 trillion naira to our debt profile for committing offense. Because what Mr. Lwane did not understand is when you continue to apply such economic theory in the real sense, it will also affect your debt profile to some extent. Some are measured in the dollars. So if you understand, you have no option to manufacturing. Tell me one country, or Mr. Lwane should mention one country he wished to spend his holidays that is not manufacturing or that is not into a secondary sector. It's not true. You cannot continue to practice hide and seek economics and believe that your country will be developed overnight. The truth is, if you want to develop an economy, number one thing which I'm advising Mr. President to do is to look at the issue of power. Leave the remaining. It's English, it's economic theory. This is, you see, for me, I would rather, Mr. President, practice, say, trial by success method instead of what is being told, which are trial by errors. Nigeria have tried it under, I think it was a military head president, Babangida at that time. What I think we should do is to focus on power generation, housing,
Paul,
which is number two, manufacturing, which is number three, then Nigeria can be there.
Paul, I think everything you said anchored on one: power, 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 power. And I'm sure everyone will agree. Now I'm going to hand over both of you, Mr. Bismarck Lwane, the CEO at Financial Derivatives Company. Thank you very much. And Paul Alaje, who is senior economist at SPM Profession. I'm going to hand two of you over to Mr. President, who, of course, I'm sure is watching the program right now. Thank you very much. We'll be right back in 2.